Let's talk about Kirkuk, Iraq. It's a city that literally helps fuel the world. But it's also a city that's choking on the fumes of its own wealth. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the tough paradox right at the heart of Kirkuk. How can an oil powerhouse end up leaving its own people to pay such a heavy environmental price?
You know, in Kirkuk, the day often starts under this pale, persistent haze. It's the smoke from factory stacks and the constant burn of gas flares from the nearby oil fields. This picture, it really captures the city's struggle. Kirkuk is absolutely vital to Iraq's economy because of its oil, but that very same resource is poisoning its air, its soil, and its water.
To really get a sense of Kirkuk's importance, just look at this number. Every single day, the province's oil fields pump out 350,000 barrels for the global market. That is a massive economic engine. But what's the real cost for the people who actually live there?
Well, here's the flip side of that coin. In stark contrast to all that oil, a state analysis found that only 0.085% of the city is green space. I mean, that number is just shockingly low. It's way, way below international standards, and it's a huge red flag that the environment there is under some serious pressure.
So this really gets to the core of the paradox, right? Kirkuk's wealth is also its poison. So now, let's dig in and see exactly how this is affecting everything from the local rivers to the very air that people have to breathe.
All right, let's start by looking at how this pollution is seeping into the very fabric of the region. We're talking the water, the soil, and the air. An environmental activist named Shokafa Salahi paints a pretty grim picture. She describes this place they call the Oil Valley, where oil spills from the fields up north just mix with rainwater. And this contaminated water, it doesn't just sit there, it flows directly towards Kirkuk, carrying all that pollution with it.
And the ripple effect from that is just enormous. This polluted water damages local farms, it's a threat to livestock, and it endangers wildlife. But the impact spreads even further, because that oil waste eventually finds its way into the Tigris River, which is one of Iraq's most critical waterways.
But the pollution isn't just in the water. The air carries this invisible threat, methane. It's a toxic gas that's released constantly during oil extraction. And just to put that in perspective, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency says it's a super potent greenhouse gas, 28 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. And in Kirkuk, it's just always in the air.
Now, when you look at the actual data on air quality, it is stark. The World Health Organization says the unhealthy limit for this stuff is 5 micrograms per cubic meter. In Kirkuk, they've recorded levels as high as 22. That's more than 4 times the limit. We're talking about a poisonous level of air pollution. Okay, so you have contaminated water and you have toxic air. So what does this all mean? Well, it leads us to the most important part of this story, the direct impact all this is having on the health of the people who call Kirkuk home. And this isn't just a theory. Dr. Niaz Ahmad Amin, who's the director of the Kirkuk Cancer Hospital, confirms what everyone in the city fears. He says it directly. Environmental pollution is contributing to a rise in diseases, especially respiratory illnesses and, most alarmingly, cancer.
The human cost goes beyond the hospital walls, though. You can feel it in the quality of daily life. The city's few precious green spaces are literally withering away because of water shortages and, as activists point out, a real lack of government support. These vital community spaces are just drying up and disappear.
All of this brings us to a really critical question. The problems are so obvious: the pollution, the health crisis, the dying parks. So why isn't more being done to protect the people who live there?
So let's try to answer that. When you start to look at who should be protecting the environment and the people, a really clear pattern of failure and, honestly, inaction starts to emerge.
The breakdown is systemic. Sources on the ground say many factories in Kirkuk either don't have pollution filters at all or are using ones that are completely useless and outdated. When the Kirkuk Environmental Office was approached for data on air pollution, they refused to comment. And like we just saw, government authorities aren't maintaining the city's gardens. It's a failure on multiple levels.
Let's just zoom in on one specific example of this. The deputy director of Kirkuk Parks says that to do its job properly, his department needs 1,200 employees. So how many do they actually have? Just 132. That's barely 10% of the staff they need.
And when you look even closer at who those 132 employees are, the staffing problem is even worse. Half of them are elderly, retired, or disabled, over 80% of them aren't certified or are illiterate, and a tiny 3% actually hold agricultural degrees. So this department isn't just understaffed, it's critically underqualified for the job. So what does this all add up to? When you combine massive, unchecked pollution with this kind of systemic institutional failure, the future for Kirkuk looks pretty uncertain, clouded by the same haze that hangs over the city every single morning.
So let's just recap the reality here. Kirkuk is a city that's essential for its oil, but it's being suffocated by pollution. This has triggered a public health crisis, and the very institutions that are supposed to be stepping in are simply failing to act.
And all of this leaves us with a final, pretty sobering question. For cities that are built on oil, is this just the inevitable price of that wealth? Does the prosperity that fuels the world have to come at the cost of poisoning the very people who live on top of it?